If you have skin in the game, you can get hurt. Olympia, Washington is 48 miles from one of the largest repositories of U.S. nuclear weapons at the Bangor-Kitsap Trident submarine base on Puget Sound. Each of the Ohio-class submarines maintained there is presently allowed to carry 20 intercontinental ballistic missiles, each of which may have as many as 12 independently targetable reentry warheads. James and Shelley Douglas, founders of the Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action. Trained as a theologian, as was his wife Shelley, James Douglas had been a professor of religion at the University of Hawaii and at Notre Dame. They were deeply inspired by Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. and bought land abutting the fence of the naval base at Bangor-Kitsap. They set about creating a center for the study of principles of nonviolence and led many anti-weapons activities. Archbishop Hunthausen, a genuine Vatican II progressive, was wholeheartedly supportive of abolition of nuclear weapons, particularly the Tridents, which carried a world full of destruction. Working with a colleague, Bishop Matheson of Amarillo, Texas, the home of Pantex, maker of H-bombs, Hunthausen protested the arrival of the white train, which carried fresh bombs to stash in bunkers at Bangor-Kitsap. Among many other remarkable nonviolent activities during his tenure as Archbishop, he withheld half his wages as a war tax resistor. It's direct action we'll be talking about, or nonviolent resistance. If I was going to protest nuclear weapons, I couldn't ask for a better place than the Trident base at Bangor. I needed to tell governments they had no authority to slaughter innocent millions or risk ending all life on Earth. In America so far, you can protest a lot without risk. Depending on how inflammatory your letters to Congress get, you won't likely have a file at the National Security Agency. Marching in the street with others carrying a sign likewise won't come to much unless you get into a scuffle. Wearing a uniform while carrying an assault rifle, we thought would definitely get you one. That is, until Charlottesville and January 6th. I was arrested for stepping onto a Navy base. You would have thought I was pretty well behaved. Catholic sisters taught me in elementary school. Catholic brothers taught me in high school. I attended a Jesuit university, where as a freshman and sophomore, I was required to attend Army ROTC classes, wearing a uniform one day each week. But before I began my senior year, I joined the Dominican novitiate in Minnesota. For a long time, I had thought it was a mistake, insofar as I'd lasted only 7 days. Today, looking back, I regard it as one of the best experiences of my life. You see, I was a devotee of the pacifist Trappist monk Thomas Merton. I read Catholic leftist literature. I felt called, but it was not to be. I returned to college for my senior year and graduated with an A.B. in psychology. I didn't have to burn my draft card. I began graduate school at Indiana University in Psych. When I left IU, the Selective Service scheduled a medical exam. They measured the glasses I wore for extreme nearsightedness and declared me 1Y, eligible for service only in time of war or national emergency. I married, settled into a career, and raised a family. Now widowed and retired with kids on their own, I began working for peace. I sold lemonade to the thirsty at the peace shows, which were staged on a hill overlooking the Cleveland Air Show at the Lakefront Airport. Every Labor Day weekend, the show had the Navy's Blue Angels screaming overhead. Immense cargo planes one could examine inside and out were on display next to tanks and surveillance drones. Military docents padded about everywhere to answer kids' questions. The show was a recruitment circus. I wrote my senators to oppose illegal killing by drones in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iraq. A colleague and I traveled to Washington, D.C. to protest with the Veterans for Peace at the White House. I studied the military-industrial congressional complex and learned how contractor campaign donations locked up almost every representative in almost every state. I watched militarism creep into the schools to recruit rural and urban youngsters who had no hope of getting a job during the Great Recession. I studied the direct action tactics of the civil rights nonviolent protesters during the 60s. I learned about protests against drone killing at Creech Air Force Base in Nevada and Hancock near Syracuse. Pilots cradled safely within mobile trailers electronically flew the drones that killed in the Middle East and then went home to wives and families for supper and an evening of television. I discovered the Kings Bay Plowshare 7, a group of middle-aged and older men and women from the Catholic worker movement who vandalized the Trident base in Georgia, hoping to bring public outrage at the murderous intent in the missiles. I grew to admire their righteous chutzpah. Like the sit-ins of the 60s, direct action against nuclear weapons could have costs: rough treatment, fees, a record, and possibly prison. Jesuit priest Steve Kelly of the Plowshare 7 received a 33-month sentence for breaking into the Trident base, not his first offense. Activist Kathy Kelly, no relation, was incarcerated numerous times for her actions. I attended one of her lectures in Cleveland on her work in Afghanistan. Regrettably, I haven't any photographs of my trespass with my banner on the naval base, but the Navy had plenty of witnesses. This picture shows a Tacoma Railroad station elegantly remodeled into a regional federal court where I reported for my arraignment. I pled not guilty. They told me I'd get a notice of the trial date. But I hadn't the heart or funds for a trial. So after thinking about it and consulting with the Ground Zero lawyer, I changed my plea to guilty and was allowed to make a statement at the trial. Except for a few proud supporters from Ground Zero and other local peace groups, I read it before a virtually empty courtroom. After study and prayer, I concluded our nuclear policy of mutually assured destruction is an irrational delusion, which by accident or intention will inevitably one day annihilate all life on Earth, an omnicide where neither we nor roaches nor viruses survived. We have ignored this for close to 75 years, as if cowed and lulled by our country's militarism, we slept on an ever costlier, ever larger pile of dynamite, trusting that diabolical madness to prevent our obliteration. But we have seen ingenious systems fail, and we know fissile materials have been misplaced, lost, or stolen. For decades, we presumptively feared it would be a maniac from some other country who might topple the Jenga tower of worldwide death. I decided I could no longer by silence be complicit in this risk of the greatest conceivable evil. heartened by the heroism of protesters, and filled with a hope of responding rationally and creatively to the prospect of planetary horror. I had a banner made asserting nuclear weapons are immoral to produce, stockpile, and use, and displayed it on the ground of those most likely to benefit from reading it and taking its message to heart. I did not just trespass on the base. Without my banner, I had no cause to do. But with it, I finally and publicly answered the duty of my conscience and exercised my right of free speech where the federal government seemed not to want me to. Your Honor has the opportunity, as do all, to join the community resisting nuclear madness. Declare the money, genius, and effort we have so far expended out of fear a moral waste. Declare we could have aided the world to have cleaner water, wider education, more hospitals, and all manner of economic development, instead of spreading a debilitating fear of impending doom. Through our well-intentioned wizardry, we led nations to the precipice of nuclear despair. By courage, we can lead them safely away to begin the tasks of justice for a peaceful world. The Navy prosecutor recommended a fine of $50. Judge Fricke, however, cited my sincerely held beliefs, reduced the fee by half, and commended me on the use of my First Amendment rights. With court costs, it was $65 total for a misdemeanor on my federal record. Not bad, considering I could have gotten a $5,000 fine and half a year in the slammer. It wasn't the protest to end all protests. The government didn't apologize and promise me they'd destroy the weapons before supper. Except for a few articles in the local peace newsletters, there was no radio, no TV, or news cameras. I thought, maybe if 100 of us had crossed the line together. My protest on May 11th, 2019, did not come out of nowhere. 6 years previously, on December 9th, 2013, I had posted on my blog, The Whole Truth and Nothing But, an article I titled Alone in the Doom Womb, Observations Made Contemplating Shells of the Cold War ICBMs on display in the Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio. As crazy as the notion was, it made you think. What could we have done had the war money been spent on the troubles that cause wars instead of the threatening and killing that promote wars? Wouldn't that be an effective military? Wouldn't that be leading by example? Wouldn't that be exceptional? No, they'd scream. That would be taking a terrible risk. We're not a nation of gamblers. We are a nation of gamblers, but we're not paying any attention to the gamble. We've got these very real weapons with very real people trained and dedicated to use them, and very real politicians who are gambling with their mouths every day they talk about our military might. The chips are our lives and those of our children and the lives of billions over the planet. You want to keep on gambling on war and death? Personally, I favor gambling on peace and life.